In rural Ridgefield, Kansas, a 68-year-old retired teacher was about to face the ultimate public humiliation. What started as a proud graduation day celebration took a devastating turn when her own granddaughter screamed that she was an embarrassment to the family. Eleanor Sullivan wasn't your typical grandmother. For 15 years she had managed her late husband's investment portfolio, growing a modest inheritance into substantial college funds for all 3 grandchildren. Known for her warm heart and unwavering support, when her granddaughter rejected her publicly, she had no idea she was triggering the most calculated response in family history. Eleanor's methodical decision would systematically dismantle their educational future. What began as cruel rejection would become perfect justice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Sullivan stood at her kitchen window, watching raindrops race down the glass as she sipped her morning coffee. At 68, she still moved with purpose through her modest 2-story home in Ridgefield, Kansas, though the morning ritual of preparing for her granddaughter Abigail's high school graduation had taken longer than usual. Her outfit was carefully selected. A tailored navy dress with a tasteful pearl necklace that had been her mother's. She wanted to look perfect for Abigail's big day. Almost time, she murmured to herself, smoothing her dress and checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. The lines around her eyes had deepened since last year's Christmas gathering, but her silver hair was neatly styled and her posture remained straight. She'd spent 3 days preparing for this milestone event, getting her hair done at Mabel's salon downtown, having her nails manicured for the first time in years, and selecting a graduation gift that represented both her pride and her hopes for Abigail's future. The doorbell rang precisely at 9:30 a.m. Eleanor opened the door to find her daughter Patricia standing on the porch, her expression tight with what Eleanor had come to recognize as perpetual disapproval. "Mom," Patricia's voice carried across the threshold, crisp and efficient. "You're ready? Good. We need to get going if we want decent seats." At 46, Patricia carried herself with the forced precision of a woman perpetually concerned with appearances. Eleanor had raised her to be strong, perhaps too strong. Now that strength had hardened into something colder, more demanding. "I've been ready for an hour," Eleanor replied, grabbing her purse and the carefully wrapped gift box containing the antique gold compass that had belonged to Eleanor's father, a symbol of guidance that she hoped would serve Abigail in college and beyond. Behind Patricia, her husband Richard climbed out of their luxury SUV, his movements deliberate and mechanical. At 48, he possessed the calculated efficiency of a corporate lawyer who measured life in billable hours. His presence at family gatherings had become increasingly rare, a detail that hadn't escaped Eleanor's notice. "Eleanor," Richard nodded without warmth. "Nice dress. Very appropriate." The way he said appropriate made it sound like a limitation rather than a compliment. "Thank you, Richard. How's the firm?" Eleanor asked, knowing the question would trigger his standard 5-minute monologue about corporate mergers, allowing her to retreat into her thoughts while appearing engaged. As Richard launched into his rehearsed speech about his latest legal victory, Eleanor's mind drifted to Abigail. Her eldest granddaughter had changed over the past 2 years. The sweet, curious girl who had spent summers reading books on Eleanor's porch swing had gradually transformed into someone more distant, more concerned with social media status than genuine connection. Still, Eleanor maintained hope that beneath the teenage rebellion beat the heart of the compassionate child she'd always known. "We should go," Patricia interrupted Richard's monologue with practiced efficiency. Abigail texted that the graduates are already lining up. The drive to Ridgefield High School passed in strained silence, broken only by Patricia's occasional comments about neighborhood developments and property values. Eleanor watched the familiar streets pass by, remembering when she had taught English at this very high school for 32 years before her retirement. The campus had changed, new buildings, fresh paint, modern landscaping, but the essence remained the same. Young lives on the cusp of transformation. Possibilities stretching endlessly forward. The parking lot was already crowded when they arrived, parents and grandparents streaming toward the football field where rows of white chairs faced a decorated stage. Eleanor recognized many faces, former students, now parents themselves, colleagues who had retired before or after her, shop owners and community members who formed the backbone of Ridgefield. "Mrs. Sullivan," a warm voice called out, and Eleanor turned to see Jennifer Matthews, a former student who now taught mathematics at the high school. "So wonderful to see you. You must be so proud of Abigail today." "Beyond proud," Eleanor replied with genuine warmth. "How's your mother doing? I heard she had surgery last month." Jennifer's face softened. "She's recovering well, thanks to your casseroles and daily visits. You've been an angel." Patricia shifted impatiently beside Eleanor. Mom, we need to find our seats. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Eleanor said a quick goodbye to Jennifer, noting the slight eye roll from Patricia as they walked away. Her daughter had long been embarrassed by Eleanor's tendency to connect deeply with people, to remember details about their lives, to offer help without being asked. Patricia viewed these qualities as inefficient, perhaps even intrusive. Eleanor viewed them as the essence of community. They found seats in the 5th row, close enough to see Abigail's face when she crossed the stage. Eleanor carefully placed her purse and the gift box on her lap, excitement building in her chest despite the tension radiating from Patricia beside her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Where's Marcus? Eleanor asked, noticing her son-in-law scanning his phone rather than the crowd. Business trip, Patricia replied without looking up from her own device. London. Some merger thing. He sent flowers to Abigail's house. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. Her son-in-law's absence at family milestones had become so common that his presence would have been more noteworthy than his absence. His corporate success had built the 4-bedroom house in Ridgefield's most prestigious neighborhood and funded luxury cars and exclusive summer camps, but it hadn't bought him time to watch his daughter graduate. As the ceremony began, Eleanor felt a swell of emotion as the graduates filed in, their blue robes bright against the green of the football field. She spotted Abigail immediately, tall like her father, with Eleanor's own auburn hair, now highlighted with blonde streaks that caught the morning sunlight. Despite the distance, Eleanor could see the confidence in her granddaughter's stride, the straight shoulders that spoke of accomplishment and promise. The principal's speech was mercifully brief, focusing on resilience and community, themes that resonated with Eleanor's own values. The valedictorian, a quiet boy whom Eleanor had tutored in creative writing during his freshman year, delivered a surprisingly powerful address about finding one's authentic voice in a world of distractions. When it came time for the graduates to receive their diplomas, Eleanor leaned forward slightly, camera ready. Abigail Eleanor Montgomery, the principal announced, and Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes at the sound of her own name included in her granddaughter's. It had been Patricia's one concession during a difficult divorce, naming her daughter after Eleanor, who had provided both emotional and financial support during those dark days. Abigail crossed the stage with grace, accepted her diploma, and moved the tassel on her cap from right to left. Eleanor captured the moment perfectly, her hand steady despite her emotion. As Abigail returned to her seat, she scanned the audience and Eleanor waved, hoping to catch her eye. Abigail's gaze passed over her without pausing, and Eleanor lowered her hand slowly, telling herself that the oversight wasn't intentional. Her granddaughter was overwhelmed, focused on the ceremony, surrounded by peers. There would be time for connection afterward. The ceremony concluded with the traditional tossing of caps, a blue confetti against the clear Kansas sky. Parents and family members streamed onto the field, creating a chaotic sea of hugs and photographs. Eleanor followed Patricia through the crowd, clutching the gift box and searching for Abigail's familiar face. They found her surrounded by a group of friends, all taking selfies and laughing with the unrestrained joy of achievement and freedom. Eleanor hung back slightly, sensing that this moment belonged to youth, not to grandmothers with antique compasses and memories of a different time. Abigail. Patricia called, her voice carrying over the crowd noise with practiced authority. Congratulations, honey. Abigail turned, her expression shifting subtly as she spotted her mother and grandmother. She disengaged from her friends with a quick word and moved toward them, accepting Patricia's careful hug, designed not to disturb her perfectly arranged hair or makeup. Hi Mom, Abigail said, her voice carrying the forced brightness that Eleanor had noticed more frequently in recent years. We did it. You did, Patricia corrected with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Your father sends his congratulations. He's devastated he couldn't be here. Abigail nodded, unsurprised and apparently unbothered by her father's absence. Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, and something in her expression hardened slightly, becoming more guarded. Hi Grandma, she said. The warmth noticeably absent compared to her greeting to Patricia. Abigail, my darling, Eleanor stepped forward, arms outstretched for an embrace that Abigail reluctantly accepted. I am so incredibly proud of you. Valedictorian next year at Chapman University, your grandfather would have been bursting with pride. Abigail stepped back quickly from the embrace, glancing around as if to check who might have witnessed it. Thanks, she said, the word clipped and efficient, a social obligation fulfilled rather than a genuine expression of gratitude. Eleanor extended the carefully wrapped gift box. I have something for you. It belonged to my father, your great-grandfather. Abigail took the box with visible reluctance, holding it awkwardly as if unsure whether to open it immediately or save it for later. The decision was made for her as her phone chimed with an incoming message. "It's Kylie," she said, looking at Patricia rather than Eleanor. "They're all heading to the riverside for the graduation lunch. Can I go with them instead? I'll meet you at home for the family dinner." Patricia hesitated, glancing at Eleanor with a rare moment of consideration. "We made reservations at Palmer's, remember? The three of us, to celebrate your achievement." "Mom, please," Abigail's voice took on the wheedling quality that Eleanor recognized as highly effective with Patricia. "Everyone's going to be at Riverside. It's tradition for the graduates." "What about Grandma? She came all this way to celebrate with you," Patricia said, though her resolve was clearly weakening. Eleanor stepped in, not wanting to be the reason for disappointment on Abigail's special day. "You should go with your friends, dear. We can have our celebration at dinner tonight." "Are you sure?" Patricia asked, though her relief was evident. "Absolutely," Eleanor replied with a smile that masked her disappointment. "Youth should be with youth on days like this." Abigail's face brightened immediately. "Thanks, Grandma. I'll see you tonight, I promise." She turned to leave, still clutching the unopened gift, when Eleanor's voice stopped her. "Abigail, your gift? Would you like to open it now or later?" Abigail glanced down at the box as if she'd forgotten she was holding it. "Oh, right. I'll open it tonight, okay? I really need to go, Kylie's waiting." As Abigail rushed back toward her friends, Eleanor felt a familiar pang of disconnection. The gulf between them seemed to widen with each passing year, each milestone. She wondered when exactly the change had begun, when the little girl who had begged for bedtime stories and morning pancakes had transformed into this polite stranger who could barely spare 5 minutes for the grandmother who had helped raise her. "Well," Patricia said, checking her watch, "I suppose we could see if Palmer's can move our reservation to dinner time instead." "That would be lovely," Eleanor replied, though her appetite had diminished considerably. "Or we could just have a quiet lunch, the two of us. It's been a while since we've had time to catch up." Patricia's expression suggested this was the less appealing option, but she nodded with resignation. "I'll call the restaurant." As they walked back to the car, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the nature of expectations and reality. She had imagined this day differently: warm embraces, shared tears of joy, perhaps a moment of genuine connection with the granddaughter who carried her name. Instead, she felt like an obligation, a box to be checked on Abigail's busy graduation day schedule. "She's just excited," Patricia said as they drove toward Palmer's, the upscale restaurant where they now had a dinner reservation for 5 instead of a lunch reservation for 3. "You know how teenagers are. Everything is about friends at this age." "Of course," Eleanor agreed, not wanting to burden her daughter with her hurt feelings. "It's natural. I remember when you were her age." Patricia laughed without humor. "I was never that obsessed with social status. I was too busy studying to get a scholarship so I wouldn't burden you and Dad financially." The irony of this statement wasn't lost on Eleanor. Patricia had indeed earned a partial scholarship to Kansas State, but Eleanor and her late husband James had covered the remainder of her expenses without complaint. Just as they had established college funds for each of Patricia's children. Funds that had grown substantially under Eleanor's careful management after James's death. "Different generations face different pressures," Eleanor said diplomatically. "Social media has changed how young people experience milestones. Everything is performed now, documented for an audience." Patricia sighed, tapping the steering wheel impatiently at a red light. "You always make excuses for her behavior. That's why she takes advantage." "I don't see it as making excuses," Eleanor replied carefully. "I see it as trying to understand her world. It's different from the one we knew." "Different doesn't mean better," Patricia muttered, accelerating as the light turned green. Lunch was a subdued affair, their conversation revolving around safe topics: community news, Patricia's garden renovations, the weather forecast for the coming week. They avoided the growing tension regarding Abigail, though it sat between them like an uninvited guest. After lunch, Patricia dropped Eleanor at her home with a promise to pick her up at 6 p.m. for the dinner reservation. "Try to rest this afternoon, Mom. You look tired." Eleanor wanted to point out that she wasn't some fragile antique that needed careful handling, but she simply nodded and waved as Patricia drove away. Inside her quiet house, Eleanor placed her purse on the hall table and slipped off her shoes, the silence enveloping her like a familiar blanket. She made a cup of tea and carried it to her study, where photographs chronicling 4 generations of her family lined the walls. Her parents, herself and James on their wedding day, Patricia as a chubby-cheeked toddler, then a serious-faced college graduate, Abigail's birth, her first steps, her middle school science fair victory. A visual history of love and connection. That seemed increasingly at odds with the present reality. The afternoon passed slowly as Eleanor tried to focus on her book club novel but found her mind wandering to the evening ahead. She wondered if Abigail would open her gift tonight, if she would appreciate the significance of the compass that had guided her great-grandfather through World War II and back home to Kansas. She wondered if there was still time to bridge the growing distance between them before Abigail left for college in California, 1,000 miles from Ridgefield. At 5:30, Eleanor changed into a different dress, emerald green with a simple gold brooch, and refreshed her makeup. She wanted to look her best for the family dinner, hoping that the more intimate setting might allow for meaningful conversation. Perhaps Abigail would be more relaxed away from her peers, more like the thoughtful girl Eleanor remembered. Patricia arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, her punctuality one of the few constants in their relationship. Eleanor noticed immediately that her daughter seemed tense, her movements stiff as she walked up the driveway. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor asked as she locked her front door. "Fine," Patricia replied too quickly. "Just a busy afternoon. Getting things ready for tonight." The drive to Palmer's was quiet. Patricia focused intently on the road while Eleanor gazed out the window at the familiar streets of Ridgefield. The town had changed over the decades, family-owned businesses replaced by chain stores, farmland transformed into housing developments, but its essence remained. Community, connection, continuity, values that Eleanor had tried to instill in her daughter and granddaughter with varying degrees of success. Palmer's restaurant occupied a beautifully restored Victorian house at the edge of town, its garden patio strung with fairy lights that glowed softly in the early evening. Richard's car was already in the parking lot, and Eleanor felt a flicker of surprise. Perhaps he had returned early from his business trip after all. Inside, they were led to a private dining room where Richard sat with Abigail and her younger brother Ethan, who had been staying with his father for the past week. Eleanor felt a surge of joy at seeing her 16-year-old grandson, who rose immediately to embrace her. "Grandma." Ethan's genuine enthusiasm was a balm to Eleanor's spirit. "I didn't know you'd be here tonight. Dad just picked me up an hour ago." "I wouldn't miss celebrating your sister's graduation," Eleanor replied, returning his hug warmly. "How was the science program at your father's university?" "Amazing," Ethan began, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "The professor let me use the electron microscope and, let's save the science talk for after we order," Richard interrupted, checking his watch. "The kitchen closes at 9, and we haven't even seen menus yet." Eleanor sat beside Ethan, noting that Abigail barely looked up from her phone to acknowledge her arrival. The unopened gift box sat on the table beside her water glass, still wrapped in the silver paper with its delicate blue ribbon. "Did you have a good time with your friends this afternoon?" Eleanor asked Abigail gently. "It was fine," Abigail replied without elaboration, her thumbs still moving rapidly over her phone screen. "Abigail, put the phone away," Patricia said with an edge to her voice. "This is a family dinner." With visible reluctance, Abigail slipped the phone into her purse, her expression suggesting that she was enduring rather than enjoying this family obligation. Eleanor noticed that her granddaughter had changed clothes since the graduation ceremony, now wearing an expensive-looking dress that Eleanor suspected had been purchased for this occasion. "You look beautiful," Eleanor offered sincerely. "That color suits you perfectly." "Thanks," Abigail replied, the word automatic rather than heartfelt. The waiter arrived with menus, temporarily shifting the focus to food choices and wine selections. Eleanor ordered the salmon, though her appetite remained diminished by the strained atmosphere. Conversation flowed unevenly, with Ethan providing most of the energy and engagement, enthusiastically describing his week at the university science program while the others listened with varying degrees of interest. "Have you decided on your final schedule for fall semester?" Richard asked Abigail as their entrees arrived. "The orientation packet said you need to submit preferences by next Wednesday. I'm still deciding between macroeconomics and international relations for my social science requirement," Abigail replied, showing more animation than she had all evening. "Emma took macro last year and said the professor was really tough." "Take the challenging course," Richard advised. "Graduate programs look for rigorous coursework, not easy A's." Eleanor watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and melancholy. Abigail would be the first in the family to attend an elite private university rather than a state school. Her academic achievements had opened doors that neither Eleanor nor Patricia had accessed. Yet the cost of this achievement seemed to be a growing distance from her roots, from the values that Eleanor had tried to instill. "Chapman has an excellent study abroad program," Eleanor mentioned, trying to join the conversation. "Your grandfather and I always regretted not traveling more when we were younger." Abigail's expression flickered with something like impatience. "I'm planning to apply for the London program junior year." Dad thinks it would look good for law school applications. Is law school the direction you're leaning? Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. Abigail had always shown an interest in creative writing, filling notebooks with stories and poems throughout her childhood. Of course, Richard answered before Abigail could respond. With her analytical skills and debate championship, she's a natural. I've already introduced her to colleagues at Stanford Law. Eleanor nodded, noting that Abigail's own aspirations remained unexpressed. Another silence descended on the table, broken only by the sounds of silverware against china and Ethan's occasional commentary on the food. You haven't opened Grandma's gift, Patricia observed as they waited for dessert, gesturing to the box that had sat untouched throughout the meal. Abigail looked at the package as if she'd forgotten its existence. Oh, right. With reluctant hands, she reached for the box, carefully removing the ribbon and paper in a way that suggested she'd been taught that tearing was impolite. Eleanor watched her granddaughter's face, hoping to see a flicker of the wonder that had once been so characteristic of her expression when receiving gifts. The hinged velvet box opened to reveal the antique brass compass, its face yellowed with age but still perfectly functional, the needle swinging true to north as it had for nearly 80 years. The inside of the lid held an inscription, "To find your way home, wherever life leads you." It belonged to my father, Eleanor explained, leaning forward slightly. He carried it through France and Germany during the war. Said it saved his life more than once and brought him back to Kansas when the fighting was done. Abigail lifted the compass from its velvet nest, examining it with an expression that Eleanor couldn't quite read. Was it disappointment? Confusion? The response she had hoped for, recognition of the object's significance, appreciation for the family history it represented, was notably absent. Thanks, Grandma, Abigail said, her tone polite but distant. It's historical. Eleanor felt a sharp pang in her chest at the lukewarm response. I thought it might be meaningful as you begin your journey away from home. A reminder that you always have roots here, people who love you, a place to return to. Abigail carefully replaced the compass in its box, her movements precise and careful. It's really unique. The word hung in the air between them, a diplomatic substitute for what Eleanor suspected Abigail really thought: old-fashioned, irrelevant, unwanted. A relic from a generation whose values and experiences seemed increasingly foreign to the world Abigail inhabited. I also have something for you, Richard announced, reaching into his jacket pocket and withdrawing a small velvet pouch. A graduation gift to start your professional collection. Abigail accepted the pouch with visibly more enthusiasm than she had shown for Eleanor's gift. Inside was a pair of pearl earrings with small diamonds, elegantly modern and clearly expensive. Dad. Abigail's face transformed with genuine delight. They're gorgeous. Thank you. She immediately removed her current earrings to replace them with Richard's gift, turning to Patricia for approval. How do they look? Sophisticated, Patricia nodded approvingly. Perfect for orientation events and alumni networking. Eleanor watched the exchange, understanding with painful clarity the difference in their gifts. Richard had given Abigail something that aligned with her current values and aspirations: status, appearance, material success. Eleanor had offered connection, history, meaning, values that seemed increasingly irrelevant to the world Abigail was entering. Dessert arrived, elaborate confections that looked more like art installations than food. Eleanor barely tasted her chocolate creation, her mind preoccupied with the growing awareness that she was losing connection with her eldest grandchild in ways that went beyond physical distance. As coffee was served, the conversation turned to practical matters: Abigail's campus housing assignment, the logistics of moving her belongings to California, the schedule of orientation events that Richard had already programmed into his digital calendar. We'll need to coordinate about the tuition payment, Patricia said, glancing at Eleanor. The first installment is due August 1st, Eleanor nodded. Everything is arranged. The funds will transfer automatically from the investment account I established. For years of tuition, room and board, plus a reasonable allowance for books and living expenses. And graduate school? Richard asked, his tone suggesting this was a foregone conclusion rather than a possibility. The fund should cover that as well, Eleanor replied. James and I were quite specific about wanting to provide educational opportunities for all 3 grandchildren through graduate studies if they chose that path. Abigail looked up from stirring her coffee. So it's all set? Everything's covered? Yes, dear, Eleanor confirmed. Your grandfather and I wanted to ensure that you and your siblings would have every opportunity to pursue your dreams without financial burden. A flicker of something, relief? Entitlement? Crossed Abigail's face before she returned her attention to her coffee. Eleanor felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if a transaction had been confirmed rather than a gift acknowledged. That's very generous, Eleanor, Richard said, though his tone suggested he viewed the college fund as an obligation fulfilled rather than a meaningful gift. Education is the one thing worth investing in these days. It's not just about the financial investment, Eleanor said carefully. It's about investing in the person Abigail is becoming, in the values and perspectives she'll develop through higher education. Richard's phone chimed, and he glanced at it with the practiced movement of someone perpetually on call. Excuse me, I need to take this. London office. He stepped away from the table, disappearing onto the restaurant's patio. So, Eleanor turned to Abigail, hoping to use this moment for genuine connection, beyond academics. What are you most looking forward to about college? Abigail seemed startled by the question, as if she hadn't considered college as anything beyond a stepping stone to career success. I guess, the networking opportunities? Chapman has amazing connections to law firms and judicial internships. Eleanor nodded, trying to mask her disappointment at the response. And what about the chance to explore new ideas? To discover new perspectives and passions? Patricia intervened before Abigail could answer. Mom, not everyone views college as the philosophical journey you did. Times have changed. It's about career preparation now, not finding yourself. Can't it be both? Eleanor suggested. Learning practical skills while also developing as a whole person. Abigail exchanged a glance with her mother, a look that Eleanor recognized with a sinking heart, the silent communication between people who shared a view that the older generation simply didn't understand modern realities. Richard returned to the table, slipping his phone into his pocket. We should probably wrap this up. It's getting late, and Abigail has that breakfast tomorrow with her scholarship cohort. The evening concluded with polite efficiency, the bill paid by Richard despite Eleanor's attempt to treat the family, goodbyes exchanged in the parking lot with promises to gather again before Abigail left for college in August. Eleanor hugged her granddaughter, holding on perhaps a moment too long, trying to communicate through embrace what words had failed to convey. I'm so proud of you, Eleanor whispered. Not just for your achievements, but for the person you are. Abigail tolerated the embrace with the stiff patience of someone fulfilling a social obligation. Thanks for coming today, Grandma. And for the gift. As Eleanor settled into Patricia's car for the ride home, she glanced back to see Abigail already on her phone, the compass box nowhere in sight. The gulf between them seemed to widen with each passing moment, a distance measured not in miles but in values, priorities, and connection. She's just focused on her future, Patricia said, correctly interpreting Eleanor's silence as they drove through the darkened streets of Ridgefield. It's a good thing, really. She knows what she wants and she's going after it. Yes, Eleanor agreed, though her heart felt heavy. I just hope she doesn't lose sight of what truly matters along the way. Patricia's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. What matters is setting herself up for success in a competitive world. The values you and Dad emphasized, community, connection, service, those are luxuries nowadays, Mom. They don't pay the bills or build careers. Eleanor turned to look at her daughter's profile, illuminated intermittently by passing streetlights. Is that really what you believe, Patricia? That compassion and integrity are luxuries rather than necessities? Patricia sighed, a sound of exasperation mixed with resignation. I believe in preparing my children for the world as it is, not as I wish it were. As they pulled into Eleanor's driveway, the conversation hung unfinished between them, a fundamental difference in worldview that neither could fully bridge. Eleanor thanked Patricia for the ride and declined her offer to walk her to the door, needing the solitude of her home to process the emotions of the day. Inside, Eleanor moved through her evening routine mechanically, hanging her dress, removing her makeup, preparing for bed with the efficiency of long habit. But as she sat on the edge of her bed, the weight of disconnection settled heavily on her shoulders. The antique compass had been rejected, not just as an object but as a symbol of what Eleanor valued most: direction, purpose, the ability to find one's way home through life's storms. In its place, Abigail had embraced pearls and diamonds. Status and appearance, the currency of a world that increasingly measured worth in material rather than moral terms. Eleanor glanced at the photograph on her nightstand, James in his garden, surrounded by the roses he had tended with such care, his face creased with laughter as he looked toward the camera. Toward her. What would you do, my love? She whispered. To his image. How would you bridge this gap? But James had been gone for 5 years, and the questions that haunted Eleanor's heart remained unanswered as she drifted into restless sleep, dreaming of compasses spinning wildly, unable to find true north. The morning light filtered through Eleanor's bedroom curtains, casting soft patterns on the wall as she woke from fitful sleep. Her dreams had been troubled, filled with spinning compasses and disappearing pathways. She checked the clock, 7:30 a.m., later than her usual rising time. The emotional weight of yesterday's graduation had disrupted her typically disciplined routine. Eleanor moved through her morning rituals with deliberate focus, trying to push aside the lingering hurt from Abigail's indifference. As she prepared her coffee, the phone rang, an unexpected sound in the early morning hours. Eleanor Sullivan speaking, she answered, her teacher's voice automatically engaging. Mrs. Sullivan? It's Jennifer Matthews from the high school. The voice on the other end sounded hesitant. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, Jennifer. Is everything all right? A pause. I'm not sure how to say this, but I thought you should know. There's a video circulating among the students, from yesterday's graduation. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. What kind of video? It's of Abigail, after the ceremony. When she was with her friends. Someone was recording and she says some things about you that aren't very kind. Eleanor sank into a kitchen chair, her coffee forgotten. I see. I wouldn't normally get involved, Jennifer continued, her voice gentle with concern, but given how much you've done for this community, for the school, I thought you deserved to know before you heard it from someone else. Thank you, Eleanor managed, her throat tight with apprehension. Can you tell me what's in this video? Jennifer's discomfort was palpable even through the phone. It might be better if you see it yourself. I can email it to you if that's all right? Yes, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Please send it. After Jennifer's reluctant agreement, they ended the call. Eleanor sat motionless at her kitchen table, dreading what was to come but knowing she couldn't ignore it. The chime of her laptop in the study announced the arrival of Jennifer's email. With resolute steps, Eleanor moved to her desk and opened the message. I'm so sorry, Jennifer had written. Please remember that teenagers often say things they don't mean, especially when trying to impress peers. Eleanor clicked on the video attachment, steeling herself for whatever revelation awaited. The footage was shaky, clearly recorded on someone's phone in the chaotic aftermath of the graduation ceremony. A group of students in blue robes clustered together, Abigail at the center, her cap askew and her expression animated as she spoke to her friends. Oh my God, did you see her? Abigail's voice came through the speakers with painful clarity. That navy dress must be from the Stone Age. And those shoes? Seriously, who wears orthopedic grandma shoes to graduation? Laughter from the group encouraged her to continue. And she brought me this ancient compass thing. Abigail rolled her eyes dramatically, pulling the gift box from her robe pocket and displaying it with exaggerated disdain. What am I supposed to do with this? Put it in my dorm room to show everyone I have a grandmother stuck in 1950? More laughter, and Eleanor felt each word like a physical blow. She's always doing this, showing up with her outdated advice and embarrassing stories. You're so lucky your grandparents live in Florida, Abigail said to someone off camera. Mine is stalking my life events. But doesn't she pay for your college? A male voice asked from behind the camera. Abigail's expression shifted to something calculating. Yeah, that's the only reason I put up with it. 4 years at Chapman isn't cheap, and Dad says graduate school is even worse. So I smile and nod and pretend I care about her stupid stories. Here she comes, someone warned, and the video showed Eleanor approaching through the crowd, carrying her gift, her face alight with pride and love. Watch this performance, Abigail muttered to her friends before turning to greet Eleanor. With the forced enthusiasm that now revealed itself as entirely fabricated. The video continued, capturing the brief interaction Eleanor had thought was merely awkward but now recognized as completely disingenuous. As Eleanor walked away with Patricia, the camera caught Abigail turning back to her friends with an exaggerated expression of relief. Thank God that's over, she said. Now I just have to survive dinner tonight and then I'm free until Christmas. One of her friends asked something inaudible, to which Abigail responded with a dismissive wave. Yeah, I'll have to go home for holidays until I graduate. The college fund has strings attached. Your grandma seems nice though, a female voice suggested hesitantly. Abigail's laugh was sharp and dismissive. She's a relic. Completely out of touch with reality. Always talking about community values and finding your purpose like that pays the bills. It's embarrassing. The video ended abruptly, freezing on Abigail's contemptuous expression. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. As the full impact of what she'd witnessed washed over her. The calculated deception. The mockery. The reduction of their relationship to a financial transaction. Most painful was the realization that the disconnection she'd sensed wasn't just typical teenage self-absorption or generational differences. It was deliberate manipulation, Abigail tolerating her presence solely because of the college fund. Performing the minimum required affection to secure her financial future. Eleanor closed the laptop with trembling hands. The hurt was so acute it manifested as physical pain, a pressure in her chest that made breathing difficult. She moved to the living room window, seeking the familiar comfort of her garden view. The roses James had planted still blooming despite his absence. "What would you do?" she whispered again to her late husband's memory. This time, in the clear light of morning and with the evidence of deception laid bare, an answer seemed to form in her mind with surprising clarity. James had always believed that actions had consequences, that character was revealed not through words but through choices. "Love without respect isn't love at all," he used to say. "It's just expectation dressed up in prettier clothes." Eleanor's phone rang again, startling her from her thoughts. Patricia's name appeared on the screen, and Eleanor briefly considered letting it go to voicemail. But avoidance had never been her way, not in 32 years of teaching, not in 45 years of marriage, not in 68 years of living. "Good morning, Patricia," she answered, her voice remarkably steady. "Mom," Patricia sounded distracted. Traffic noise in the background suggesting she was driving. "I'm calling about the family dinner next week before Abigail's orientation trip. Richard's mother is flying in from Phoenix, so we need to move it to Thursday instead of Friday. Does that work for you?" The casual normalcy of the request struck Eleanor as surreal after what she'd just witnessed. "Actually, Patricia, before we discuss that, there's something we need to talk about. A video has come to my attention." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "What video?" "A recording from yesterday's graduation. Of Abigail speaking about me to her friends. It's quite revealing." Patricia's sigh carried through the phone, a sound not of surprise but of irritation. "Jennifer Matthews sent it to you, didn't she? That woman never could mind her own business." The response confirmed what Eleanor had begun to suspect, that Patricia already knew about the video and Abigail's true feelings. "You've seen it?" One of the other mothers mentioned it this morning at Pilates. "Look, Mom, it's just teenage dramatics. Abigail was showing off for her friends. You know how kids are at that age, desperate to appear sophisticated and independent." Eleanor noted the lack of apology, the immediate minimization of Abigail's behavior. "This wasn't typical teenage embarrassment, Patricia. This was deliberate mockery and admitted deception. Abigail made it very clear that she only tolerates my presence because of the college fund." "She didn't mean it," Patricia insisted, her voice taking on the defensive tone Eleanor recognized from countless previous conversations about Abigail's behavior. "You're overreacting. Teenagers say thoughtless things. It doesn't change the fact that you're her grandmother and she loves you." "Does she?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Love involves respect, Patricia. It involves honesty. What I saw in that video wasn't love, it was calculation." "What do you want me to do, Mom? Ground her for having private conversations with her friends? She's 18, about to leave for college. We can't control what she says." "I don't expect you to control her," Eleanor replied, a new firmness entering her voice. "I expect you to hold her accountable for her choices and her character. Just as I would have done with you at her age." Patricia's exasperation became more pronounced. Times are different now. The pressure these kids are under, to perform academically, to build their resumes, to compete for opportunities, it's nothing like what we experienced. Sometimes they need to blow off steam. "Disrespect isn't blowing off steam," Eleanor countered. "It's a reflection of values, or the lack thereof." "Mom, please don't turn this into one of your moral lessons. Abigail made a mistake. She said things she shouldn't have. But she's a good kid with a bright future ahead of her. Let's not derail everything over one thoughtless moment." Eleanor recognized the familiar pattern, Patricia's deflection, the minimization of behavior that would have been unthinkable in her own household, the prioritization of achievement over character. She had allowed this pattern to continue for years, stepping back from confrontation to preserve family harmony. But harmony built on deception wasn't harmony at all. "I need some time to think, Patricia," Eleanor said finally, "about what this means and what should happen next." "What does that mean?" Patricia's voice sharpened with sudden concern. "You're not considering anything drastic, are you?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications about the college fund that had suddenly become the central thread of their family relationship. "I'm considering what's right," Eleanor replied. "What aligns with the values your father and I tried to instill. Values that appear to have been lost somewhere along the way." "Mom, I'll call you in a few days, Patricia. Please give my regrets about Thursday's dinner. I won't be attending." Eleanor ended the call before her daughter could protest further. The decision forming in her mind required clarity and conviction, qualities that had guided her through life's previous challenges. She would not rush into action based on hurt feelings, but neither would she pretend that nothing had changed. Everything had changed. The morning passed in quiet contemplation as Eleanor moved through her garden, tending to James's roses with the careful attention they deserved. Physical activity had always helped her think, and the familiar rituals of gardening, pruning, weeding, nurturing, provided a framework for the difficult decisions ahead. By noon, her path had become clear. Eleanor showered, changed into a simple but professional outfit, and drove to the local branch of Midwest Trust Bank where she had conducted business for 40 years. Martin Reynolds, the branch manager and son of Eleanor's former colleague at the high school, greeted her with genuine warmth. "Mrs. Sullivan. What a pleasant surprise. I heard Abigail's graduation went beautifully yesterday. You must be so proud." "Life is full of unexpected lessons, Martin," Eleanor replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I need to discuss some changes to certain accounts." Sensing the seriousness beneath her calm exterior, Martin led Eleanor to his private office where they could speak confidentially. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" "I need to modify the terms of the educational trust funds I established for my grandchildren," Eleanor said, her voice steady with resolve. "Specifically, Abigail's portion." Martin nodded, pulling up the relevant accounts on his computer. "The Chapman University payments are scheduled to begin August 1st, correct?" "That's what I need to change," Eleanor confirmed. "I want to redirect those funds." Martin looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "Redirect? May I ask where?" "To a charitable foundation," Eleanor replied. "I'd like to establish a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from Ridgefield High School who demonstrate not just academic promise but also character and community commitment." Martin's fingers paused over his keyboard. "Mrs. Sullivan, I don't mean to overstep, but this is a significant change. The trust for Abigail represents over $250,000 in educational funding. Are you certain about this decision?" "I've never been more certain of anything, Martin," Eleanor replied, meeting his concerned gaze with unwavering clarity. "The purpose of that trust was to support values and aspirations that I believed Abigail shared. I've recently discovered that this isn't the case." "I understand," Martin said carefully. "But legally, while you have every right to make this change since the trust remains in your control until disbursement, it will have major implications for Abigail's educational plans." "I'm aware," Eleanor acknowledged. "Which is why I'm not making this decision lightly or out of momentary anger. This is about alignment with purpose and values, the very foundation upon which the trust was established." Martin nodded slowly, his expression shifting from concern to respect for her evident conviction. "What about the trusts for Ethan and Mason? Will those remain as currently structured?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "They've demonstrated no reason for modification. In fact, I'd like to increase Mason's portion slightly to ensure he has additional support for his special needs during college." For the next hour, Eleanor and Martin worked through the legal and financial details of restructuring Abigail's educational trust into the new scholarship foundation. By the time Eleanor signed the final documents, the Eleanor and James Sullivan Community Scholars Program had been established, with its first scholarships to be awarded the following spring to students who might otherwise struggle to afford higher education. "The paperwork will be processed by tomorrow," Martin informed her as they concluded their meeting. "The funds will be transferred to the new foundation account within 3 business days." "Thank you, Martin," Eleanor said, gathering her copies of the documents. "And when will the trust dissolution be communicated to the other parties?" "Official notifications will be sent next week to all parties named in the original trust documents. That includes Patricia and Richard, as Abigail's parents." Eleanor nodded, mentally preparing for the storm that would follow. Perfect timing. The orientation deposits for Chapman are due next Friday. This will give them time to make alternative arrangements if necessary. As Eleanor drove home through the familiar streets of Ridgefield, she felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for what had been lost, regret for the signs she had ignored for too long, but also a growing sense of purpose and rightness in her decision. The money that would have funded Abigail's privileged education at an elite university would now help multiple students who valued the opportunity that had been so casually dismissed. The ringing of her phone interrupted her thoughts as she pulled into her driveway. Ethan's name appeared on the screen, bringing a genuine smile to Eleanor's face for the first time that day. "Grandma," her grandson's voice came through with its characteristic enthusiasm. "Dad said you weren't coming to dinner on Thursday, and I wanted to check if you're okay." Eleanor felt a rush of affection for this grandson who, despite being raised in the same household as Abigail, had somehow maintained his capacity for empathy and genuine connection. "I'm fine, Ethan. Just needed some time to myself this week." "Is it because of the video?" Ethan asked directly, his perceptiveness reminding Eleanor of James. "The one with Abigail saying those awful things?" Eleanor's breath caught. "You've seen it?" Everyone has, Ethan admitted, his voice dropping. It's all over Instagram. Abigail's freaking out because she didn't realize Marco was recording when she was talking. She's trying to get people to take it down, but you know how that goes, once it's out there. I see, Eleanor said, processing this new information. The private humiliation had become public, which explained Patricia's defensive reaction that morning. How do you feel about what she said? Ethan's response was immediate and unambiguous. It was wrong, Grandma. Completely wrong. I told her so last night and we got into a huge fight. Dad said I should mind my own business, but it is my business. When someone treats my grandmother like that. The fierce loyalty in his voice brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Thank you, Ethan. That means more than you know. Mason saw it too, Ethan continued, referring to their 14-year-old brother who lived primarily with Patricia. He was really upset. You know how much he loves your stories and the time you spend with him. Eleanor thought of her youngest grandson, whose learning differences had often made him feel like an outsider in his achievement-oriented family. She had always shared a special bond with Mason, spending hours helping with his reading challenges. And celebrating his unique perspective on the world. I'll call Mason tomorrow, Eleanor promised. Make sure he knows this doesn't change anything between us. So what happens now? Ethan asked with the directness of youth. With Abigail. And everything? Eleanor considered her response carefully, not wanting to place Ethan in the middle of adult conflicts but also respecting his maturity enough to offer honesty. Actions have consequences, Ethan. In life, we don't get to treat people disrespectfully. And then expect everything to continue as before. You mean the college fund? Ethan's perceptiveness was sometimes startling. Dad was on the phone with the Chapman Financial Aid office this afternoon. Sounded pretty intense. So Richard had already been informed of the change to Abigail's trust, likely through his banking connections. Eleanor wasn't surprised, financial circles in Ridgefield were small and interconnected. That's between Abigail and her parents and me, Eleanor said gently. But I want you to know that your educational trust remains exactly as it was. Your grandfather and I established those funds individually, based on our belief in each of you. And your futures. I don't care about the money, Grandma, Ethan said with a sincerity that warmed Eleanor's heart. I care about you being okay. I am okay, Eleanor assured him, and realized that it was increasingly true. Sometimes difficult situations clarify what matters most. This is one of those times. After promising to see Ethan soon, Eleanor ended the call and entered her quiet house. The afternoon light filled her living room, illuminating the photographs. That chronicled her family's journey through decades of joy, challenge, growth, and change. She moved to the mantel and picked up a particular image, Abigail at about 7 years old, sitting on Eleanor's lap as they read together, both their faces alight with shared delight in the story. Where did we lose this? Eleanor whispered. To the photograph, tracing her finger along the image of her granddaughter's innocent face. The little girl who had once treasured their connection had somehow transformed into a young woman who viewed that same connection as an embarrassment. A burden to be endured for financial gain. The doorbell's chime startled Eleanor from her reverie. Through the front window, she could see Richard's luxury SUV parked at the curb, its engine still running as if he expected this to be a brief visit. Taking a deep breath to center herself, Eleanor opened the door to find her former son-in-law standing on her porch, his expression a carefully controlled mask of professional concern. Eleanor, Richard nodded with formal politeness. We need to talk. I assumed we would, Eleanor replied, stepping back to allow him entry. Though I expected Patricia might come with you. Richard moved into the living room with the confident stride of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. Patricia is dealing with Abigail, who's rather upset at the moment. I thought it best if I handled this particular situation. By situation, I assume you mean my decision regarding the educational trust, Eleanor said, choosing to remain standing rather than inviting Richard to sit. This wasn't a social call, and she wouldn't pretend otherwise. I received a call from Stephen Blackwell at First National this afternoon, Richard confirmed, naming his personal banker. He mentioned you'd made some unconventional changes to Abigail's college fund. I assume there's been some misunderstanding. The condescension in his tone was subtle but unmistakable, the suggestion that Eleanor, as an elderly woman, must have confused herself or been confused by others into making decisions she didn't fully comprehend. There's no misunderstanding, Richard, Eleanor replied with the calm authority that had served her well through decades in the classroom. I've redirected the funds that were designated for Abigail's education to establish a community scholarship foundation instead. Richard's professionally pleasant expression faltered slightly. Based on what, exactly? A teenager's thoughtless comments to her friends? Some hurt feelings over a graduation gift? This seems like a disproportionate response to typical adolescent behavior. This isn't about hurt feelings, Eleanor corrected him. It's about values and integrity. Abigail made it abundantly clear that our relationship is nothing more than a financial arrangement to her, a performance she endures to secure her education funding. I simply decided to honor the truth of that revelation by removing the incentive for continued pretense. Richard's facade of reasonable concern began to crack, revealing the anger beneath. Do you have any idea what you've done? Orientation deposits are due next week. Tuition follows 2 weeks after that. Chapman doesn't offer significant financial aid to students in our income bracket. You've jeopardized Abigail's entire educational future over some petty grievance. A grievance implies entitlement, Eleanor observed. Abigail isn't entitled to that money, Richard. It was a gift, offered in good faith to support not just her education but the values her grandfather and I believed she embodied. Those values, respect, honesty, compassion, were notably absent in what I witnessed yesterday. Richard ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, his composure slipping further. She's 18, Eleanor. Teenagers say stupid things. Especially when they're trying to impress their peers. You're judging her based on one moment of poor judgment. Am I? Eleanor asked, her voice level. Or am I finally acknowledging a pattern that's been evident for years but that I've chosen to ignore out of love and hope? Abigail didn't just make unkind remarks about my appearance or my gift. She admitted, proudly, that our entire relationship is a performance designed to secure financial benefit. That reveals something fundamental about her character and the values she's internalized. So your solution is to punish her by destroying her chances at attending one of the country's top universities? Richard's voice rose with indignation. Do you have any idea how hard she worked for that acceptance? The hours of study, the extracurriculars, the community service projects? Community service that she apparently viewed as resume building rather than genuine engagement, Eleanor noted. And yes, I recognize her academic achievements. They're impressive. But education is about more than acquiring credentials, Richard. It's about developing as a complete human being, intellectually, emotionally, ethically. From what I witnessed yesterday, Abigail has focused exclusively on the first while neglecting the others. Richard's expression hardened into something calculated and cold. I always knew you were old-fashioned, Eleanor, but I never thought you'd be vindictive. Abigail said some thoughtless things. She should apologize for that, and she will. But this response, using your financial power to punish her, this is elder abuse in reverse. The accusation hung in the air between them, revealing the depth of Richard's misunderstanding. Eleanor felt a surprising calm as she realized that his perspective, viewing her decision as punishment rather than consequence, as wielding power rather than upholding values, perfectly illustrated the very problem she was addressing. This isn't punishment, Richard, she said quietly. It's alignment. The money that would have funded Abigail's education will still support education, for students who truly value the opportunity, who haven't had the privileges Abigail has enjoyed, who understand that character matters as much as achievement. We'll challenge this legally, Richard threatened, his lawyer's instincts emerging. The trust was established for Abigail's benefit. You can't simply redirect it because you're upset with her. You're welcome to consult your colleagues. Eleanor replied, unfazed. But as Martin Reynolds will confirm, the trust was structured to remain under my control until disbursement. It was a gift, not an entitlement or a contract. Legally, I have every right to modify its terms based on my assessment of whether its purpose is being fulfilled. Richard's face flushed with anger as he recognized the truth of her statement. This isn't over, he said, moving toward the door. Patricia and I will discuss our options. Abigail deserves better than to have her future held hostage by an emotional overreaction. As he reached for the doorknob, Eleanor spoke one final time, her voice carrying the weight of certainty. Richard, before you go, ask yourself this: if Abigail had spoken about one of your law partners the way she spoke about me, would you still be defending her behavior as typical teenage thoughtlessness? Or would you be concerned about the character it reveals? The question found its mark. Richard paused, his back stiffening slightly, but he offered no response as he exited, closing the door with controlled force behind him. Eleanor watched through the window as he returned to his waiting vehicle, phone already pressed to his ear, undoubtedly calling Patricia to report the failure of his intervention. The confrontation had been unpleasant but clarifying, confirming for Eleanor that her decision, however difficult, aligned with the principles that had guided her life. As the evening light began to fade, Eleanor moved to her study and opened her laptop. The Scholarship Foundation would need clear guidelines. A selection committee, application procedures. The work of transforming disappointment into opportunity was just beginning, and Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose as she began to outline the structure for what would become her most meaningful legacy. The compass that Abigail had rejected. would find new bearings, guiding deserving students toward futures built on both achievement and character. Something good would emerge from this painful revelation, not vindication or revenge, but redirection toward what truly mattered. As darkness fell outside her window, Eleanor whispered to James's memory, "This is right, isn't it? This is what you would have done." The answer came not in words but in the deep certainty that sometimes, love meant allowing consequences rather than shielding from them. Sometimes, the most valuable inheritance wasn't money at all, but the understanding that character, once revealed, determined destiny. The next morning dawned with the particular clarity that often follows difficult decisions. Eleanor woke early, her mind already active with plans for the scholarship foundation that would rise from the ashes of betrayal. The weight of yesterday's confrontations had settled into something more manageable, a dull ache rather than the sharp pain of fresh discovery. She was halfway through her first cup of coffee when her phone began to ring. Patricia's name flashed on the screen, and Eleanor briefly considered letting it go to voicemail. But avoidance had never solved problems, only postponed their inevitable resolution. "Good morning, Patricia," she answered, her voice calm and steady. "There's nothing good about it," Patricia snapped, dispensing with pleasantries entirely. "I've spent the night with a hysterical teenager who just had her future ripped away without warning." "What were you thinking, Mom?" Eleanor took a deliberate sip of coffee before responding. "I was thinking about alignment between actions and consequences, between values and behavior." The educational trust was established to support both Abigail's academic journey and the character development that should accompany it. Character development? Patricia's laugh was harsh and humorless. "She's 18, not a philosophy student. She said some unkind things in a private conversation. Teenagers do that. It doesn't justify destroying her college plans." "The conversation wasn't private, Patricia. It's circulating widely on social media, as I'm sure you're aware. And what Abigail revealed wasn't momentary unkindness, it was a calculated approach to our relationship based entirely on financial benefit." "So this is punishment," Patricia accused. "You're teaching her a lesson by making her suffer." Eleanor sighed, recognizing the familiar pattern of her daughter's thinking, the conflation of consequences with punishment, of boundaries with cruelty. "This isn't about making Abigail suffer. It's about redirecting resources to align with their intended purpose. The money that would have funded her education will still support education, for students who genuinely value the opportunity." "She values it." Patricia's voice rose with frustration. "She's worked incredibly hard to earn her place at Chapman. Her entire future depends on this." "Her future depends on her choices and her character," Eleanor corrected gently. The ability to attend an elite private university without financial concern was a privilege, not a right. A privilege based on a relationship she's made very clear she doesn't value. There was a moment of silence on the line, then Patricia's voice returned, lower and more controlled. "What do you want, Mom? An apology? Fine. I'll have Abigail call you and apologize. She'll write a letter. Whatever it takes." The transactional nature of the offer, apology in exchange for reinstatement of funds, only confirmed for Eleanor that Patricia had missed the point entirely. "This isn't about securing an apology, Patricia. It's about recognizing a fundamental misalignment of values that can't be fixed with forced words or performances." "Then what?" Patricia demanded. "What would satisfy you? Because right now, you're holding Abigail's entire future hostage." "I'm not holding anything hostage," Eleanor replied with quiet firmness. "I've simply chosen to direct my resources towards students who embody the values I believe education should foster: integrity, gratitude, genuine connection to community. Values that Abigail has made clear she considers outdated and irrelevant." The silence that followed was longer this time, broken eventually by a different quality in Patricia's voice, something closer to desperation than anger. "Mom, please. We can't afford Chapman without the trust. Richard's firm has been struggling since they lost the Westfield account. My design business barely covers our mortgage. We're not in a position to take on student loans of this magnitude." The revelation of financial strain behind the facade of prosperity didn't surprise Eleanor. She had suspected for years that Richard and Patricia's lifestyle exceeded their actual means, that the appearance of success had become more important than its reality. "There are excellent state universities," Eleanor suggested. "Schools that would offer Abigail a quality education at a fraction of Chapman's cost. Kansas State has a strong pre-law program. The University of Kansas offers substantial merit scholarships." "You don't understand," Patricia's voice cracked slightly. "Chapman isn't just about education, it's about connections, opportunities, the right peer group. It opens doors that other schools can't." "Perhaps," Eleanor acknowledged. "But it Seems to me that Abigail has already absorbed certain lessons about valuing status over substance, appearance over authenticity. Maybe a different educational path would provide valuable perspective. I can't believe you're doing this, Patricia whispered, her tone shifting from desperation to something harder. After everything Dad and I sacrificed to give you a comfortable retirement, to include you in family events, to make sure you weren't alone, is that how you see it? Eleanor interrupted, genuinely startled by this characterization. That you've been doing me a favor by including me in your lives? That my presence at family gatherings was an act of charity rather than a natural expression of connection? The silence that followed confirmed what Eleanor had feared, that Patricia, like Abigail, had come to view their relationship as transactional rather than relational, as obligation rather than love. That's not what I meant, Patricia backpedaled, though her tone lacked conviction. I just meant that family takes care of each other. We've always been there for you, and now when Abigail needs you, you're abandoning her over one mistake. I'm not abandoning anyone, Patricia, Eleanor said with quiet dignity. I'm simply allowing natural consequences to flow from choices made. Abigail chose to view our relationship as a financial arrangement rather than a genuine connection. I've acknowledged that truth and adjusted accordingly. And what about your relationship with me? Patricia asked, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. Are you adjusting that as well? Eleanor considered the question thoughtfully. That depends on you, Patricia. On whether you can respect my decision even if you disagree with it. On whether you value me as your mother, not just as a financial resource for your children. Of course I value you, Patricia insisted, though the defensive tone undermined her words. But I also have to protect my daughter's future. She's worked so hard for this opportunity. Then continue to protect it, Eleanor suggested. Find alternative funding sources. Help her apply for scholarships. Consider state schools with strong programs. There are many paths to success beyond the most expensive one. Patricia's sigh carried the weight of thwarted expectations. This conversation isn't going anywhere. I need to go check on Abigail. She barely slept last night. I'm sorry she's distressed, Eleanor said sincerely. But sometimes our most important growth comes through navigating unexpected challenges. This may be one of those times for Abigail. After Patricia ended the call with minimal farewell, Eleanor sat in her kitchen, watching morning light play across the walls as she considered the conversation. The gap between her values and her daughter's had never been more evident, Eleanor viewing education as character formation with academic achievement, Patricia seeing it primarily as credential acquisition and status positioning. The doorbell interrupted her reflections. Through the front window, Eleanor was surprised to see Jennifer Matthews standing on her porch, a folder tucked under her arm and concern evident in her expression. Jennifer, Eleanor greeted her former student warmly. This is unexpected. I hope I'm not intruding, Jennifer replied, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. After sending that video yesterday, I felt responsible in a way. I wanted to check that you're alright. Eleanor invited her inside, touched by the genuine concern. I'm doing better than you might expect, she assured Jennifer as they settled in the living room. Sometimes difficult revelations can be clarifying. Jennifer nodded, placing her folder on the coffee table between them. I've been thinking about what happened, not just the video, but the whole situation with Abigail. It bothered me all night. That's very kind of you, but please don't let it trouble you, Eleanor said. You did the right thing by letting me know. It's not just that, Jennifer hesitated, then opened the folder to reveal a stack of papers. I know it's not my place, but after I heard what you did with the trust fund, redirecting it to scholarships, I couldn't stop thinking about some of our students who could benefit. Eleanor's interest was immediately piqued. You've heard about the foundation already? That was fast, even for Ridgefield. Jennifer smiled apologetically. Small town? Big gossip. The bank manager's wife is on the school board with me. But she only mentioned it because she knows how passionate I am about helping our first-generation college students. Tell me about them, Eleanor invited, genuinely interested. For the next hour, Jennifer shared stories of remarkable students. At Ridgefield High, young people with extraordinary potential but limited financial resources. A brilliant mathematics student whose parents worked double shifts at the meat processing plant to keep the family afloat. A gifted writer whose mother was raising 4 children alone after their father's death. A science prodigy whose migrant worker parents spoke no English but had sacrificed everything to give their son educational opportunities. These students have something in common beyond their financial need, Jennifer concluded, her eyes bright with conviction. They possess a quality that's become increasingly rare, genuine gratitude for educational opportunity. They don't take learning for granted because they understand its value. Eleanor nodded, feeling a growing sense of purpose as she reviewed the informal profiles Jennifer had prepared. This is exactly what I had in mind when I established the foundation. Education should go to those who truly value it, not just as a credential but as a transformative experience. I hope you don't mind my presumption in bringing these students to your attention, Jennifer said. I know the foundation will have formal application procedures eventually, but I thought hearing about real students might help shape your vision. It's not presumptuous at all, Eleanor assured her. In fact, it's precisely what I needed, a reminder that redirecting these resources isn't just about responding to disappointment. It's about creating opportunity where it will be genuinely valued. As Jennifer prepared to leave, she hesitated at the door. There's something else you should know. The faculty has been discussing what happened with Abigail's video. Several teachers are using it as a case study in digital citizenship, how private moments can become public, how words have lasting consequences in the digital age. Eleanor hadn't considered this dimension, that Abigail's actions and their consequences might become a learning opportunity for others. That's a valuable lesson, though I imagine Abigail wouldn't appreciate being the example. Sometimes the most powerful teaching moments come from real situations with real stakes, Jennifer observed. That was something you always understood. As a teacher, that education happens in life, not just in classrooms. After Jennifer departed, Eleanor spent the afternoon at her computer, researching successful scholarship programs and drafting preliminary guidelines for the foundation. The work absorbed her completely, transforming her hurt into purpose, her disappointment into vision. By late afternoon, she had outlined a structure that would support not just tuition but mentorship, community engagement, and leadership development for deserving students. The ringing of her doorbell once again interrupted her work. This time, when Eleanor opened the door, she found Ethan standing on her porch, his bicycle leaning against the railing and his expression unusually serious for a 16-year-old. I hope it's okay that I came without calling first, he said, shifting his weight nervously from one foot to the other. Things are pretty intense at home, and I needed to talk to someone who makes sense. Eleanor's heart warmed at his words. And the implicit trust they contained. You're always welcome here, Ethan. No invitation needed. Once settled in the kitchen with glasses of lemonade, Eleanor's homemade recipe that had been a staple of summer gatherings for decades, Ethan seemed to struggle with how to begin the conversation he'd clearly come to have. It's about Abigail, isn't it? Eleanor prompted gently. And the college fund. Ethan nodded, relief evident in his expression. Everyone's freaking out. Mom's been on the phone with financial aid offices all day. Dad's talking about second mortgages and loans. Abigail hasn't stopped crying since yesterday. I'm sorry your home is in turmoil, Eleanor said sincerely. That wasn't my intention. But it was the right thing to do, Ethan said with surprising certainty. What Abigail said, how she's been acting, it was wrong. Really wrong. And nobody was holding her accountable until you did. The maturity of his perspective surprised Eleanor. Many people would say I overreacted, that I should have just had a conversation with Abigail instead. Ethan shook his head. Would that have changed anything? She would have apologized because she had to, not because she understood why what she did was wrong. She would have kept pretending to care about your relationship just to keep the money coming. His insight into his sister's likely response was remarkably astute. When did you get so wise about human nature? Eleanor asked with genuine curiosity. Ethan shrugged, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. I guess I've been watching how people act when they think they're getting something versus how they act when they're giving something. It's different. That's a profound observation, Eleanor acknowledged. The difference between transactional relationships and genuine ones. Like how mom and dad are always really nice to their clients and colleagues, but then they talk about them completely differently when they're gone, Ethan continued, his brow furrowed. Or how Abigail volunteers at the senior center but complains the whole way there and back about how boring old people are. Eleanor felt a pang at this. Confirmation that Abigail's attitude toward her wasn't an isolated incident but part of a pattern. What about you, Ethan? What do you think about the educational trust one established for you? Ethan considered the question seriously. I'm grateful for it, he said finally. College is expensive, and knowing I don't have to worry about that is amazing. But I'd still want to spend time with you even if there wasn't any money involved. You're my grandmother. You listen to me when I talk about weird science stuff that bores everyone else. You remember things I care about. His simple articulation of genuine connection brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. That's all I ever wanted. From any of you, to be valued for who I am, not what I could provide. I think that's what Dad doesn't understand, Ethan said, his insight surprising Eleanor once again. He keeps saying you're punishing Abigail, but it's not about punishment. It's about whether relationships are real or just transactions. Exactly, Eleanor confirmed, impressed by his understanding. Actions have natural consequences. Abigail revealed that our relationship was based primarily on financial benefit for her. I simply acknowledged that reality and adjusted accordingly. Ethan nodded, then hesitated before asking his next question. Mom says you're using your money to control everyone, that you've always done that. Is that true? The accusation stung. Though Eleanor had suspected Patricia held this view. I've never used money to control anyone, Ethan. I've used it to create opportunities, to express love, to support dreams. But I've never attached strings or demanded certain behaviors in exchange. That's what I thought, Ethan said with evident relief. It didn't sound like you. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. So what happens now? Ethan finally asked. With Abigail in college and everything? Eleanor considered her response carefully. That depends largely on Abigail and your parents. Chapman is still an option if they're willing to explore loans, financial aid, or perhaps a gap year for Abigail to work and save. There are excellent state universities that would offer her a quality education at a fraction of the cost. There are many paths forward, just not the one they had counted on. What about your relationship with them? With all of us? The question cut to the heart of Eleanor's concerns. That also depends on choices they make now. I'm still your grandmother. I still love all of you. But relationships need to be based on genuine connection and mutual respect, not financial benefit or obligation. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. I hope they figure that out. Especially Abigail. So do I, Eleanor agreed softly. Growth often comes through challenge. This may be an opportunity for Abigail to develop qualities that will serve her far better in life than an elite university credential. As the evening shadows lengthened, Eleanor prepared a simple dinner for Ethan before sending him home on his bicycle, his shoulders visibly lighter after their conversation. His visit had reinforced her conviction that redirecting Abigail's educational funds had been the right decision, not as punishment but as alignment with truth and values. The following days established a new rhythm as Eleanor immersed herself in developing the scholarship foundation. Working with Martin Reynolds at the bank and Jennifer Matthews at the high school, she crafted application procedures, selection criteria, and mentorship components that would ensure the funds truly transformed lives. On the fourth day after her decision, as Eleanor worked in her garden pruning James's beloved roses, a sleek black car she didn't recognize pulled into her driveway. The driver's door opened to reveal Abigail, her face partially hidden behind oversized sunglasses despite the cloudy day. Eleanor straightened slowly, removing her gardening gloves as she watched her granddaughter approach with hesitant steps. This was the confrontation she had been expecting, though she was surprised it had taken this long to materialize. "Grandma," Abigail said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. "Can we talk?" "Of course," Eleanor replied, gesturing toward the porch with its comfortable wicker chairs. "Would you like some iced tea?" Abigail shook her head, following Eleanor to the porch but remaining standing even after her grandmother had taken a seat. The body language spoke volumes, Abigail poised for flight, unwilling to settle into conversation that might require vulnerability. "I assume you know why I'm here," Abigail began, removing her sunglasses to reveal eyes reddened from crying. "About the trust fund." "Yes," Eleanor acknowledged simply. "I expected we would need to discuss it eventually." Abigail paced the small porch, her movements sharp with nervous energy. "Mom and Dad said you're redirecting it to some scholarship thing instead of my college. Because of what I said in that stupid video." "That's partially correct," Eleanor replied. "Though it's not just about what you said in the video, Abigail. It's about what those words revealed about how you view our relationship, as a financial arrangement rather than a genuine connection." Abigail's expression flickered between defiance and desperation. "I didn't mean those things. I was just showing off for my friends, trying to seem cool and independent. You know how it is at graduation, everyone's trying to act like adults who don't need their families anymore." The explanation might have been convincing if Eleanor hadn't heard the same justification from both Patricia and Richard, suggesting they had coached Abigail on this approach. "Words reveal underlying attitudes, Abigail. Especially unguarded words spoken when you thought no one who mattered was listening." "So you're punishing me for one mistake?" Abigail's voice rose with frustration. "Destroying my future because I said something stupid?" "I'm not destroying anything," Eleanor corrected gently. "I'm allowing natural consequences to flow from choices made. And I'm redirecting resources to align with their intended purpose, supporting education for students who genuinely value the opportunity, not just the credential or status it provides." "I do value it," Abigail insisted, tears welling in her eyes. I worked so hard to get into Chapman, the grades, the extracurriculars, the interviews. It's been my dream since freshman year. I don't doubt your academic dedication, Eleanor acknowledged. But education involves more than academic achievement, Abigail. It involves character development, values formation, growth as a complete human being. The trust was established to support both dimensions of learning. Abigail's frustration visibly mounted. So I have to be perfect to deserve an education? Make one mistake and lose everything? This wasn't about being perfect, Eleanor said, with quiet firmness. It was about basic respect and authenticity in our relationship. You revealed that your kindness toward me was a performance designed to secure financial benefit, that you viewed time with me as an obligation to endure, rather than a connection to value. The direct confrontation with her own words seemed to deflate some of Abigail's defensive anger. She sank into the wicker chair opposite Eleanor, her posture collapsing from rehearsed indignation to genuine distress. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice small and uncertain. Chapman expects the first tuition payment in 2 weeks. Dad says they can't afford it without loans they might not qualify for. Mom's talking about me taking a gap year to work and save money. Everything I've worked for is falling apart. Eleanor studied her granddaughter's face, searching for signs of genuine reflection rather than calculated performance. Sometimes when our careful plans collapse, we discover new paths we wouldn't have otherwise considered. Paths that might ultimately lead to greater growth. That sounds like a greeting card, Abigail muttered, a flash of her typical dismissiveness returning. I need actual solutions, not philosophical comfort. There are practical options. Eleanor replied, choosing to overlook the disrespect in Abigail's tone. State universities with excellent programs at a fraction of Chapman's cost. Community college for prerequisite courses before transferring. Work-study programs that combine education with relevant experience. None of those have the prestige of Chapman, Abigail objected. The connections, the name recognition for law school applications. Perhaps prestige isn't the most important factor to consider, Eleanor suggested. Perhaps this is an opportunity to reevaluate what truly matters in education, and in life more broadly. Abigail looked up, frustration evident in her expression. What do you want from me, Grandma? An apology? Fine, I'm sorry for what I said. It was mean and ungrateful and I shouldn't have done it. There. Can we fix this now? The transactional nature of the apology, offered as currency to purchase reinstatement of funds rather than as genuine recognition of harm caused, confirmed for Eleanor that Abigail still viewed their relationship primarily in financial terms. This isn't about securing an apology, Abigail, she said gently. It's about authenticity in our relationship. About valuing connection for its own sake, not for what material benefit it might provide. So there's nothing I can do? Abigail's voice cracked with genuine distress. No way to fix this? Eleanor considered her granddaughter carefully, seeing beyond the defensive posture to the frightened young woman beneath. The scholarship foundation has been legally established. Those funds have been irrevocably directed toward supporting students who demonstrate both academic promise and character. That decision won't be reversed. Abigail's shoulders slumped in defeat. So that's it then. I've ruined everything. You haven't ruined anything, Eleanor corrected. You've simply encountered a consequence that requires adaptation. How you respond to this challenge will reveal far more about your character than any words or apologies could. What does that even mean? Abigail asked, genuine confusion replacing some of her defensive anger. It means that life rarely follows the exact path we envision, Eleanor explained. Resilience, the ability to adapt to unexpected challenges while maintaining your core purpose, is ultimately more valuable than any credential from any institution. Abigail absorbed this in silence, her expression suggesting she was genuinely considering Eleanor's words rather than simply formulating her next argument. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a different quality, less rehearsed, more authentic. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. I had everything figured out, the perfect school, the perfect major, the perfect trajectory to law school and beyond. Now I don't know what happens next. Few of us ever truly know what happens next, Eleanor said, reaching across to cover Abigail's hand with her own. We make plans, certainly. But life intervenes with its own curriculum of lessons we need to learn. Sometimes the most valuable education comes through navigating the unexpected. For the first time in their conversation, Abigail didn't immediately counter with an argument or objection. Instead, she looked around the porch, at the carefully tended garden beyond, at the comfortable simplicity of the home Eleanor had made, at the evidence of a life built on values rather than appearances. I don't know how to start over, she finally said. Everything was already decided. Perhaps that's the first lesson, Eleanor suggested. Learning to navigate uncertainty, to make decisions based on new realities rather than old expectations. That's a skill that will serve you far better in life than any prestige attached to a particular university name. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the porch, grandmother and granddaughter sat in a silence that, while not entirely comfortable, carried less hostility than before. Eleanor sensed that beneath Abigail's disappointment and frustration, something was shifting, perhaps the first recognition that actions had consequences, that relationships required genuine investment rather than performance. When Abigail finally rose to leave, her demeanor was subdued but calmer. "I need to think about all this," she said, replacing her sunglasses though the day had grown cloudier. "About what happens next." "That's a good beginning," Eleanor acknowledged. Thoughtful reflection rather than reactive response. At the porch steps, Abigail paused and turned back. "The scholarship thing, for other students. When will it start?" "The first Eleanor and James Sullivan Community Scholars will be selected this fall," Eleanor replied. "For students beginning college next year." Abigail nodded slowly, as if processing this information. "So it will help people who couldn't otherwise afford college?" "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "Students with academic promise and demonstrated character who lack the financial resources for higher education." Something flickered across Abigail's expression, not quite understanding, not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of recognition that her loss might become someone else's opportunity. Without another word, she descended the steps and returned to her car, leaving Eleanor to wonder whether any meaningful shift had occurred in her granddaughter's perspective. As the black car disappeared down the street, Eleanor remained on the porch, contemplating the conversation. There had been moments of genuine vulnerability amidst Abigail's rehearsed arguments and defensive posturing, small openings that might, with time and reflection, widen into greater self-awareness. The compass that Abigail had rejected might yet serve its purpose, though not in the way Eleanor had originally intended. Instead of guiding her granddaughter through literal journeys away from home, perhaps it would help orient her through this unexpected detour, this reckoning with consequences, this confrontation with values and character that no elite university curriculum could provide. Eleanor returned to her roses as evening approached, carefully pruning away dead growth to encourage new flowering. The parallel wasn't lost on her. Sometimes the most beautiful blooms emerged only after decisive cutting away of what no longer served the plant's true purpose. 3 months later, Eleanor stood in the small conference room at Ridgefield High School, surrounded by stacks of applications for the inaugural class of Sullivan Community Scholars. September had arrived with its particular Kansas beauty. Golden light, cooler mornings, the first hints of autumn touching the maple trees that lined Main Street. The scholarship committee, Jennifer Matthews, Martin Reynolds, Pastor Davis from the Methodist Church, and Dr. Abernathy, the retired physician who had delivered 3 generations of Ridgefield babies, sat around the table reviewing final candidates. "I think we've narrowed it to our top 5, Jennifer said, organizing the folders with characteristic efficiency. "Each one exemplifies both academic promise and the character qualities the foundation emphasizes." Eleanor nodded, feeling a profound sense of purpose as she reviewed the applications again. Lucia Morales, daughter of migrant workers, who had taught herself English while maintaining a 4.0 GPA and caring for 3 younger siblings. James Wilson, whose father's workplace injury had plunged the family into financial hardship but hadn't deterred him from excelling in advanced mathematics while working evenings at the local grocery store. Daria Washington, who had overcome homelessness to become class president and start a weekend food program for disadvantaged students. "What strikes me about these candidates," Pastor Davis observed, "is how they've all transformed personal challenges into community contribution. They haven't just persevered, they've found ways to help others despite their own difficulties." "Exactly the quality we were looking for," Eleanor agreed, thinking of how different these applications were from what she imagined Abigail's college essays had been, focused on achievement and credential acquisition rather than character development and community impact. The past 3 months had brought significant changes to the Sullivan family dynamics. Patricia's initial fury had eventually settled into a cold distance, their conversations limited to brief, functional exchanges during the rare times they needed to communicate. Richard had followed through on his threat of legal action, consulting colleagues about challenging the trust redirection, only to be firmly informed that Eleanor's legal position was unassailable. Abigail's path had taken the most unexpected turn. After the initial shock and anger, after exploring and rejecting various alternative college options as insufficiently prestigious, she had made an announcement that stunned both her parents and Eleanor: she was enlisting in the army. The military will pay for my education after I serve, she had explained during a tense family dinner to which Eleanor had been reluctantly invited. And law schools value military experience. It differentiates applications. The decision had been presented in characteristically pragmatic terms, a strategic career move rather than a call to service, but Eleanor had sensed something else beneath the calculated explanation. Perhaps the first recognition that life didn't always follow carefully structured plans. Perhaps the beginning of understanding that character was forged through challenge, not convenience. I think we've reached consensus, Martin Reynolds said, bringing Eleanor back to the present moment. These 5 students will become our first cohort of Sullivan scholars. Each will receive full tuition and expenses at Kansas State or KU, plus the mentorship component and community service requirement. Eleanor smiled, feeling a warmth that had been absent during the difficult summer months. They'll change their communities, she said with quiet certainty. That's what education at its best should do, not just elevate individuals but strengthen the collective fabric. As the committee gathered their materials and prepared to depart, Jennifer lingered behind, waiting until they were alone before speaking. There's something you should know, Eleanor. Something I overheard at the Cornerstone Cafe yesterday. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, accustomed to the efficient gossip network of small-town life. Should I be concerned? Not concerned, exactly. Jennifer replied. Just aware. Apparently Abigail spoke to her basic training unit about why she enlisted. One of the drill sergeants is Molly Hoffman's cousin. You remember Molly? She teaches physical education at the middle school? Eleanor nodded, following the typical Ridgefield chain of connection. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.